This is a different press van camera from Suzuki Optical Company. This was an earlier one and somewhat more elaborate. It was capable of taking 35mm film or 120 roll film. The extra spools and so forth that would be needed to handle the 35mm are not present here. But you can see where the spool would have been there, the sprocket, and it has an allowance for rewind here and a lever at this point which you can set to 35mm or 6x6. On 6x6 the film winding is metered by the advance knob, and on the 35mm position it's free. How you knew exactly what frame you're up to with 35mm, I've got no idea, but I'm sure there was some clever way that was organised. So I've already done the latter press van 120, and a lot of things I expect will be very much the same, so I'll probably just point out the highlights of this one as I take it apart and service it. The front pops out on struts somewhat like a carrot. The shutter seems to go fairly well. I can see by looking at the blades that they certainly need a bit of cleaning. The lens on this is a Takuma 75mm f3.5, just as it was on the other one I serviced. Here, notably on the housing at this point, they've milled away a bit of that housing near that screw on the flash contact. Now I had trouble with that screw on the flash contact on the other press van camera because there wasn't enough clearance between the screw and the housing, and it was shorting out. It was shorting out every time I set the shutter, which just loaded the shutter over just far enough, that minute fraction of an inch, to allow it to short out. It certainly took me a while to track that one down. Anyway, into this. See what I can do with it. Now I can see that this front panel here, this chrome panel, screws on there. On the other camera, it was under leatherette, it was a different shape. The other one I wanted to get the struts out completely because I had to patch up the bellows. This one I do not. So I think I will start by just removing the lens and shutter assembly from the body. And there's just a retaining ring as on the other one, and as on the other one it looks like it's fairly well painted in, and hopefully it doesn't give me as much of a fight. The last one I had to use brutal methods to get the thing apart. I won't make you watch me fight with that. I'll tell you how I achieved it once I get there. This one's not putting up any fights. The rear lens I removed simply by unscrewing it with my fingers, and the retainer ring on the back of the shutter is unscrewing fairly easily with my lens spanner. So that's a great relief. I'll just spin the rest of that retainer ring off there with my fingers. That's it. I think the shutter will lift off the front. It does. I'll disconnect that flash contact, and now I know more about the layout of that. I'll remove those two small screws and see if I can unhook that bracket, leaving it connected to the cable. On the other one I serviced, I made the mistake of undoing that screw, whereupon everything pretty much fell apart. Yeah, how is that organised? Oh, it's a different shape altogether. It's just a simple contact on the back of that. So that's different than the previous one I worked on. So I expect that otherwise the Seikosha-Rapid shutter will probably be much the same as the other one. Right, so we've got the flash contactors off. We can ignore that. The front lens group just unscrews. This is not how you focus the camera. The camera is focused by moving in the whole front standard here with the focus knob at this point, coupled rangefinder. And here I have the shutter. The shutter in this case being a Seikosha-Rapid, which in general design is very much the same as a Rapid shutter. The details are slightly different. The basic layout's pretty much identical. The shape of the components is slightly different, but if you know how to repair one of them, you know how to repair both. I'll zoom you in for this. Alright, we have our lock screw on the front here. Rotate that. Allow me to rotate the front bayonet locking ring. Here's our shutter speed settings cam plate, and we're straight into the shutter. This is similar and different to the other one. Let's find out. I'll unhook the main spring. This is part's called the main lever in the Compur repair guides. What have we got here? That's our shutter release lever. You can lift that off. This is a different flash arrangement than the other one. It's simpler in a lot of ways. The other one had extended springs and all sorts of things. This one just has a little tab there to hit the contact. It hooks in from the back of the camera. I can see that the shutter was probably modified from a different type. This lever's been cut off. It's been cut off roughly and abruptly. Now with a Compur shutter, there would have been a cable release socket at this point, exactly that spot on the case. And almost certainly on the Seikosha shutters, they were probably the same. And the cable release would have come in from the side and it would have borne on the end of this lever. This lever's been cropped off to allow this flash mechanism to be put in here instead. Right, let's get this apart. I'll unhook that spring. I can probably lift that lever off. I can. That's the return spring for the shutter release. There's our high speed spring, 500th of a second speed spring. Is it 500th on this one? I didn't look. Where was its markings? Yes, a 500th. And I imagine that that was optimistic, just as it was on the Compurs. This lever here holds the cocking lever in the latch in the cocked position. And the spring runs all the way through to this lever, and that is more the shape I would have expected the other one that I saw in the other shutter to be. That one looks like it's not distorted out of shape. This lever here, this is our B lever, the lever that holds the shutter in the open position when the shutter is set to B and while you have your finger on the shutter release button. It can be held in place with a shoulder screw. that is all I need to remove from the mechanism plate at this stage. Now I'll flip it over and split the mechanism plate from the shutter case. The mechanism plate and shutter case are held together with 3 screws from the back, just like on a Compur or Seikosha-Rapid shutter of the era. Those screws were quite tight. Those screws are all the same length, so that means I don't have to worry about which one came from where, and I can split the case. So here we have our mechanism plate, shutter blades on it complete. Here I have the shutter case with the diaphragm blades in it. I'm looking at the state of the blades. This is running reasonably smooth, freely, not as freely as I would probably prefer it to run. I don't know whether I can unscrew this screw and that screw in position. If I can, it'll be worth doing it because it'll make the shutter easier, the diaphragm easier to reassemble. Those screws hold the settings lever on the back. That screw was loose anyway. The setting lever falls away. And I can see I've got 3 small screws hold the retaining plate in position. And there are 10 diaphragm blades, just like on a Seikosha-Rapid. Took that lot out. And I need to clean this case very carefully. This is an alignment pin here. That's to align the shutter in the mount and ensure that it stays where it's put when you're applying pressure to the cocking lever in particular. Right, all of these pieces I just need to clean down with some naphtha and a cotton bud. And if I recall correctly, I had trouble with the diaphragm blades on the other one because I was clumsy. And this time I'm going to be very, very, very careful. Right, these parts I'll clean. There's nothing much exciting in that, just naphtha and the cotton bud. What I'm cleaning it for is to remove all traces of oil and grease and anything of that nature, anything that might affect the way the shutter runs. Oils, of course, if they get on the shutter blades, can stick them, stop them from moving freely, and likewise on the diaphragm blades. Oil there can cause a problem. It can glue the blades together to the extent that if you force the settings lever, you can damage the blades, tear the rivets out of them, or just distort the blades. The blades get distorted. They may still be all connected up, but they are very, very difficult to reassemble once you take them apart for cleaning. They don't lie flat while you're trying to arrange them carefully to get them back in position. I'll be interested to get into the top of this particular camera and just see how the mechanism is set up for using 35mm film or 120 roll film. as I say, the extra components for 35mm are not present. I don't know whether the owner of the camera has them. I would imagine if he did, that he would have sent them along with the camera so that they could be serviced as well. So I doubt you'd find parts for a camera like this. I've certainly never seen them before. I imagine they're pretty thin on the ground. This is the moving plate, the one with the slots in it. This is, you turn this through an arc, and as you turn it, it pulls the pivots, the diaphragm blades on their fixed pivots and swings them inwards or outwards depending on the direction you've moved. The diaphragm blades themselves, of course, are interleaved. Shutter blades are just stacked on top of each other. Start at number 1, finish at number 5. In some cases it might be number 6 if it's got a double blade. Diaphragm blades are not like that. Diaphragm blades, each blade is on top of the next blade on one side and underneath the next blade on the other side. They're interleaved. It's my 2 screws for the setting lever. I'll see if I can assemble this just as I've taken it apart. I've never done that on a contour shutter of this nature because you cannot get at those screws on a contour shutter. On the later ones they had cutouts in the plate so that you could, which makes them much easier to service. Right, I've got to clean each of these diaphragm blades, this little rosette here, and then reassemble them. Well, here's my assembly jig, which consists of a couple of sockets. This plate goes on. There are 5 dimples on one side of the plate. They go towards the shutter blades. So the plate side that's up at the moment is the flat side, the plain side. Now I have to fit my 10 blades into place. See if I can bring them over without spilling them everywhere. I nearly achieved it. The blades are not symmetrical. The little rivets that form the pivot points for these blades are closer to the centre of the blade on one end and closer to the edge of the blade on the other. Now, as I place these blades, the pivot that's closer to the centre of the blade needs to go on first, go downwards into this plate. So placing the first 6 of the 10 blades is a fairly easy task. You just go around anti-clockwise, fitting the blades, each one with a pivot into the next hole. Here I'm using a wooden toothpick to help me manipulate the blades into position. The last of the easy blades, blade number 6. Excuse me. Right, now you have to pull back the blades to expose the positions for the next few blades. That's blade 7. Blade 8. That's not lying flush, so there's something not right there. It is in the hole. Blade 9. Blade 10. That's all the blades in position. But now I have to swing these ones back over the top without disturbing anything. That looks pretty good. Now I've got my plate to go on here. And I want to get the screws under this plate too, because I'm going to be putting them in there. So I've got to get this in the correct orientation. Now if this was a Seikosha-Rapid, it would be there. I'm assuming for the moment that it's similar enough to the Seikosha-Rapid that I can use exactly the same alignment. But I want to put these two screws through underneath that hold the settings lever in place. Well, it's just dropped through. It's not going to be as easy as I'd hoped. No, this is not going to work for me, I think. Put this to one side. I'll put my settings lever on the case and go about it in the way I normally would.